We're doing now Be'ez Hashem Yisborach Maseches Peah Daf Chof Ches Hameidl Tanya Omer Rabbi Yehuda Medva Mamurim B'meidl L'shuk Ava Meidl L'bayis Noisim Min HaMeshoyer Al HaKoil. So they're talking here about a person that thins out a tree, let's say a vineyard. And the Mishnah says that if you're thinning it out, then you don't give payah from upon the things that you thinned out, because that's not considered a ktsira. It's not considered you're cutting it, you're just thinning it out. And this Rabbi Yehuda says, Medvan were made a shuk. Then we say, it's not, he's selling it in the market, and he's not planning to keep it for a long time. If he's going to use it in his house, and I understand it means to make wine with it, talking about grapes, then it's considered a normal k'tira, and he must give payah upon that part also. Another, in this discussion of Meidl, this is what you say, that you don't give payah on the things that you thinned out. Originally, he had in mind to thin out, so it's a certain process. He plants things very thick together, and he thinks that eventually he will pluck them out. But later on, he decided, he changed his mind and he tore out some. So it means in the original plan, this was considered a normal planting. So then we say, even though later on he changed his mind, then we say that you give upon everything, because it's considered a normal ktsira, because originally you had in mind to keep it there, not to thin it. The mothers of the onions. So what this means is that the second year of an onion plant, the onions become very old and they're not good anymore. Just you wait them, you leave them in the ground, and you use the seeds. You save the seeds. So now the guy went along and he picked these mothers. So they're very bad quality. The question is, does it leave over payah from these inferior onions? So Tanakama says yes. Rabbi Yossi Poiter. We'll see the Gemara what they argue. This we had before already. There's rectangles of onions that are in between vegetables. Rabbi Yossi Omer Peah Mikol Achas V'Achas. Each rectangle deserves a separate payah. They're considered like one big rectangle. You can separate payah from one rectangle upon everything else. Rav Umar Purgara, Shmuel Umar Tzumchata. So this is the same, it's just a translation of what these emois are. And as we explained, it's a natural thing that Hashem made. The second year, the onions are not so tasty anymore. They just stay in the ground, and it grows out seeds. They use the flour, the seeds, for planting new onions. Bianca Babun B'Shem Chanina LeOmer Rabbi Yassi El Mishem Hefker. Very interesting interpretation. The Mishnah doesn't say clearly what is the reason for why is Rabbi Yossi pater. So he says the reason is Ein Odam Makpad Al Mishnayt Loimos. It's so cheap you don't even care. It's Hefker. Rabun Bachia Boya Kumer Rav Mana. He was wondering, V'Hefker Chai V'Peya. It means it's in language he's trying to ask. It's an interesting language. He's trying to ask, so my time of the Rabbanon. If it's so clear cut that it's hefker, my time the Rabbanon. Amalei answered to him, no, bezoche behen achas achas. So we're making a kimta here that the person is. So first we thought that the guy actually doesn't even care. He just leaves the onions there, and he just takes the seeds. Then he says, "B'zocha behem achas achas." He actually does pick up these. He does pick it up. So we have to explain here. It means I didn't translate it well here. I would say that Eire b'mafkir ha'imois v'noitel rak hazar oinem. Okay. But only apish miskaimeslei b'meruba miskaimeslei b'muat. It says in the Braisa that the words where that's what the Chacham said for Rabbi Yossi, even though they don't last for a long time, they last for a short time. Have a less time with the lu mishim the machnisa lekiyam. Ein mechanisen ayapish emes kaimeslei b'meruba. I'm not sure it means a lot or means for a long time. It's kaimeslei b'muat. Not sure if it means b'meruba means it doesn't last for too a long time or it doesn't take too many. Afish aimis kaimeslei b'meruba maybe means for zman meruba. Emech nisne mois lekiyam zman meruba. Now go to Halacha Dalet. Brothers that divided Nois and Shtei Peahs, they give two separate Peahs. Two brothers, and they split, so it's two separate fields. Chazur and Shtadfu, Nois and Peah. If they decided later on in their life they want to come to partners again, they give one Peah. Shnayim shelakchu se'ilum, Nois and Peah achas. Lokach, zeh tzpoine v'zeh d'roimai, zeh Nois and Peah la'atzmai, v'Nois and Peah la'atzmai. It's two separate fields. Okay, now this sugya here is very similar to what we had in the second parak. We're talking about a case where you started off as partners and then you separated, or vice versa. You started off separately and then you became partners. Katzru chassi sada b'shutafis v'chalku. Ein amafish mishaloi loy b'tchila v'loy b'saf. If originally they started, they were together, and then they separated, they finished the second half, so you cannot separate Mishalaya Shachaveira loy b'tchila v'loy b'soif. Because once they decided to separate, you cannot be mafresh from one person upon the second one. However, the opposite, and then they decided to become shutafim. It's supposed to be aval, but because that's what they did already was done separate people. So you cannot from the first half that they cut separately, you cannot take from Reuven upon Shimon. But whatever they did later, consequently, they were partners. You can separate Peah from one upon the other. We had this very similar in the first parak about two types of wheat that you changed your mind. You want to make one grain, and then you decided to make two grains. Same words. Omer Rabbi Yochanan, Also, we had this and that sugya, similar story. Katzach Hatzi Sade, the Katzach Hatzi Chatzioi, V'lei Hispik Likzer Es Hashar Achekona Kuloi. I'll put me and read the Gemara, then I'll explain it. Mafish min haroshim ala emtsoim, nemtsoim ala roshim, avalein mafish min haroshim ala roshim. What does it mean? So the guy bought a certain part of his field, half a field, and then after he finished cutting the first part, he started cutting the second, it's 3/4, and before he finished, he just started that part, then he bought the last quarter. So the way it works like this: he started cutting the first, let's say the sequence of the story. There's section 1, 2, and 3. He started cutting 1, didn't finish yet, and then he bought section 2. He finished 1 and started cutting 2, then he bought section 3. So what happens here in the story is 1 and 2 are connected. Why? Because before he finished cutting 1, he purchased already section 2. However, 1 and 3 are not connected because he purchased 3 only after he finished totally cutting 1 and started cutting 2. So what he could do, he can be mafish peah from 1 upon 2, or from 2 upon 3, or from 2 upon 1 and 2 upon 3, because he purchased 2 before he finished cutting 1, and he purchased 3 before he finished cutting 2, but not from 1 upon 3. This is the this is the story. Sipar Advarim. Kono A Lefnai Gemar Ketziroso Kono B Omer Pshu ben Levi. So there's a big field, half of it is already ripe up to a third, and half of it not. A third actually, yeah. No, it's a half. Mafish min harishon al amtsoim and amtsoim al harishon, and mafish min harishon al harishon. Similar to before. Kohen gemak tziras aleph heavy base shlish. Kohen shegamak tziras base heavy gimel shlish. Very similar to before. Amoyech kalchi ilm b'sich sadeu. Noisem peah makol echad ve'echad. He sells stalks in his field. He does the gift pay and makol echad ve'echad. The guy has a big orchard and he has a lot of olive trees, and he's selling spread out trees for his friend. So the friend does not own the land; he just owns the trees. So he must give pay from each tree. If there's even one olive tree that the owner left for himself, he is responsible for everything. Because he owns the whole land, plus he left over one tree for himself, he must give Peah for everything. Ad kedoin, kshehis chalikzer afila, kshehis chalikzer. Afila kshehis chalikzer. What's the din? The owner didn't even start cutting his tree. He sold, let's say there's 10 olive trees. He sold 9 olive trees for his friend. And his friend started taking over the olives, but he did not do even a thing for his own olive tree. Is also obligated to give Peah, even though he didn't even start anything? We can prove this from this one, from the following. It says if the moicher somebody sold the shearings of a sheep. If there's something left over, the moicher didn't sell everything. One of the sheep he's gonna keep for himself, the shearings. Then the seller has to give reishis hagez, has to give the shearings for the kohen. But if he did not leave over anything, he has 100 sheep, he sold everything, he sold all the shearings for his friend, then that person that buys it has to give. He explains that is similar, that din of gaze is similar to the din of Yehuda by us. That if you leave over anything for yourself, then you're responsible for everything. If you sold everything, then your friend has to give. Now let's see how this compares. There, does it matter if he started or not? Doesn't matter. If you left over one sheep for yourself, then you're mechuyev to give reishis hagez. It doesn't matter if you started sharing your. The then is that if it doesn't, I guess there doesn't make no logical sense why we should say that only if you started sharing your own sheep. I tell you why, because there's no din that the chiyuv is only chal when after you took a little bit for yourself. By Peah, the idea is after you started the ktsira, you're taking for yourself, then you have to leave over for the poor. But here by reishis hagez, you can even the first hair that you cut can be reishis hagez. So for sure we wouldn't say in that case where you sold all the sheep, the shearings, besides you left over one, the chiyuv of reishis hagez could be right away. Even you didn't start anything yet, your friend cut, so you are obligated to give. Here also, even though you did not start anything from your own olive tree, we say that it's enough that your friend started cutting, that you have already the obligation to separate Peah. Even though it's different cases, but since Rabbi Yirmiyah said Rabbi Yehuda, that makes it the same. That halacha that you're obligated is the same shitta like Rabbi Yehuda here, where he says that you're obligated. Rabbi Yehuda says by us in Peah that you're obligated. So that's why we want to compare and say that you're obligated here, even when you didn't start cutting. My time, Rabbi Yehuda. Now we can explain in two different ways exactly the understanding of Rabbi Yehuda. What's the Svara behind this din that if you left over some, then you're obligated to give? Mishum de choy v'sakotzer b'kama, and mishum de moichelei chutz mechivasei. You can learn it two ways. We can say that the idea works, we always give Peah from what's still standing. So when I sell olive trees, we say, okay, you sold this guy the trees, but since there's one tree that's still standing, the choiv, the obligation, rests upon that tree. The same concept of choiv is hakotzer b'kama. The idea is, we always say, whatever is still existing, the last part, that's the one that's obligated. So the same, we use that concept here. You still have something, the obligation will fall upon you. Even though it's not exactly the same, but the concept is, it's the obligation can rest on something that's last. So you might be the last one, but you're the owner, you're the last one. You can cut much after him. Doesn't matter. Different logic would be that when a person sells, he does not want to sell his mitzvah. A person, you can say it in two ways. Either the buyer doesn't want to buy things that have an obligation. I think that's more like business economical. Or it can be a person wants to do a mitzvah himself. So we can prove this. What's the real reason of Rabbi Yehuda? We can prove it from the same story that we had before, the story with the sheep. There's no such thing. This whole concept exists only by Peah, where there is the chiyuv rests upon the standing grain. So that concept we can carry over and say the chiyuv rests upon the tree of the meicher. So there's no such thing. So they must say loy mishum the macher loy chutz v'chavasoi. Isn't this the reason? Here also macher chutz v'chavasoi. That's the reason. What is the difference between these two svaras? Over al kerch v'hefish. In teime mishum ch'shochoy b'sachotzer hakotzer v'kama hefish. If you say it's the idea is that the obligation could be in the last, just like kotzer, you push it off to the last, but it doesn't mean it has to be that way. If the guy decided to do it on his own, okay, he did it. He decided to separate Peah from the ones that he started cutting, the trees. It's okay. In Teimim Shum the Meichel Chutz Mechavasoi, then Hifish V'Noitel Meni Domim. Then he can even charge money, because he can say, look, it is a business deal. It's not about just a mitzvah that you think, where the mitzvah is usually rests upon, and so you say, I took over the mitzvah now. It's more a monetary issue here. Monetary issue is that I do not want to buy things that still have strings attached. So if I did it, I want to get a refund for that. Nisraf chelke shel meicher. In teime mishum dechoyves kotzer b'kama nisraf. If it got burned, it got burned. So if going back to the olive trees, he sold 9 of his trees, and his 10th one, and the guy actually takes all the olives, and then before he has a chance to take his to pick the olives from his tree gets burnt. So then we say, okay, what can you do? It's just like a guy is cutting his field. He's cutting 90% of his field, and then the last 10% got burnt. He doesn't have to give Peah. He didn't have an obligation. The obligation was meant to be on the last 10%. It's considered like he's selling him besides the obligation. Then we say, since we found out now that the obligation was somehow stuck here because the other one got burned, it's more like a business thing. It's not a fact. It's a business deal. So okay, but maybe in the world of mitzvah, we can say, look, you have to do your mitzvah, you have no choice. You're not exempt from the mitzvah. So what do we do? Okay, I understand, I'm going to give you a refund, but you have to do the mitzvah. So the one that sold it, the one that bought it, the lekeach, has to separate from the one that he bought, and okay, you'll get refunded, but you have to do the mitzvah. Not like before that the mitzvah rests only upon the last part, and if so, there's nothing to do the mitzvah with. No, we can still do the mitzvah with the first part. Okay, now, Be'ez Hashem, we finished 2 dafim. We finished now 2 dafim. We did now daf Chof Tes and daf Lamed.